Welcome to the Online Great Books podcast, brought to you by OnlineGreatBooks.com, where we talk about the good life, the great books, great conversation, and great ideas.
Hello, dear listener. This is Brett. I'm the producer of the Online Great Books podcast, and here you are, back for more John Dewey. Look at you. So this is part 2 of Scott and Karl's discussion on Dewey's essay, Challenge to Liberal Thought, which was Dewey's criticism of liberal education. This next hour is a real shooting gallery. Lots of great moments in this show. My favorite, sorry, this is a little immature, Scott calls Dewey stinky. And not like John Dewey stinks, but capital S stinky, that's John Dewey's new name. The only bad thing about that, my favorite part of the show, is it kind of interrupts what I think was a longer story Karl was trying to tell about Babylon 5. But Dewey's calling people names too, calls some people Nazis, or implies some of his ideological enemies are Nazis. That's coming up as well. I hope you appreciate Scott and Karl tackling frustrating material like this, because I know, as somebody who came from the world of education, how Dewey's work persists, especially in academia. And if you're anything like me, you really, really appreciate deconstructions like this. So without further delay, here is part 2 of Challenge to Liberal Thought. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your time and attention. And we'll be back next week with Hallelujah, Something Different. Take care.
Well, he says on 266 that historical illiteracy is thus the outstanding trait of those critics who urge return to the ideas of the Greek medieval period as the ideas of the two ages were the same, but because philosophers of the medieval period used some of the verbal formulas set forth by the philosophers of the early period. No, wrong. He is the one that has the historical illiteracy. I don't think he understands the nature of the life of the common person of the medieval period as I understand it. I understand in many ways that they would have been freer and would have had fewer pressures on them to pursue something that they did not see as the good.
Mm-hmm.
And the Greeks largely gave us the liberal education. Now, he calls them verbal formulas. No, it's a way of thinking. It's a model for understanding the world that continued through the medieval period. They aren't just formulas. It's a specific way of thinking and understanding things. And it's a self-reliant way of seeing things. You know, where Thomas starts with his understanding of motion and then builds an entire theology upon that.
Mm-hmm.
He has more ideas than that. But, you know, like Euclid starts with the definition of a point and then builds an entire geometry on it, Thomas talks about motion and then builds an entire theology upon that. By sitting on his tuffet and using these quote-unquote verbal formulas to understand the nature of the universe. And the truth of it is Dewey can't stand for somebody to have that kind of horsepower. I don't think he even knew it, but I think if we could somehow give him some sodium pentothal and ask him or hypnotize him with a pocket watch or something, I think we would have gotten that from him.
Well, okay, let me be devil's advocate, but the life expectancy wasn't as long in the Middle Ages.
Yep.
But they had famines.
I run into this argument all the time from folks on the internet. Because if you go to my website, I write some stuff about this kind of thing. I wrote that modernity had produced nothing since the antibiotic. And people argued with me about that. We don't need technology, much technology beyond what existed in the 1200s to have antibiotics. The discovery of antibiotics were based on the observant behavior of a particular guy who saw that bacteria didn't grow close to that fleck of mold. That's it. That's it. A monk at Chartreuse could have observed that in 1300. It just took time. So rejecting this induction and all of the evils that come from it, which include progressivism and managerial social sciences, doesn't mean that you never get antibiotics and that the life expectancy never goes up.
Yeah, for me, that argument doesn't work because what's good in the older ways of life doesn't have anything to do with the science. What was good was that you knew who you were and why you were alive and what you ought to do. I mean, who knows that now?
This is for another show, but I think that I am finding my proper role more and more.
Oh, yes?
Yeah, I do. I don't really think I know what it is, but concern with the Ukraine isn't one of those things. My sphere of action and responsibilities are actually very, very small. I have children, but they are old. And my responsibility for them is getting smaller every day. My proper sphere of action is just not very big. And I think that a proper handbrake, and I shout into the void about all kinds of shit I have no power over. I know. Listen, guys, I know. But while my life is one of the most important things to me, it's not very big, and the edges of it are pretty close to the center. That's actually a good thing to know. I think that the medieval person knew that. I've griped on this show about the necessity for me to understand sewage treatment in order to make a good vote on the bond election. That's oppressive to me. That's not appropriate for me. How am I going to get up to speed on sewage treatment and high finance for city improvement budgets? And what? How am I going to do that and then go vote? Like, what did the fuck it, what? I can't do that. I can barely figure out where the best place to buy bone meal is for amending my garden. Like, how am I supposed to do that?
You have a lot of humility because everybody thinks that he or she can know everything that's needed to be known and do geopolitics. If you were going to have anybody who could know the right way to do this sort of thing, they'd have to be liberally educated. Even then, good luck.
Right.
Even then, you go read Thucydides, go read his account of the Athenians trying to decide whether they ought to open a second front in Sicily. There's no way they could know.
No.
Well, then why are they voting in the assembly on things they have no possible way of deciding correctly?
And this brings up something very interesting, which is why would we even consider questions that we can't answer like that? Like sometimes you have to. Sometimes they bomb Pearl Harbor, and you got to make a decision. In the face of.
Did they though?
I know. Let's just pretend, okay? And sometimes you have to, but sometimes you ought to just flip a coin because you don't know.
Mm-hmm. Oh, gosh, when I do Livy and we talk about the Romans wouldn't do anything without consulting an augur.
Why not?
I love it. So one of my basic principles in reading even John Dewey is to think they're not idiots.
Well,
and so if there's an ancient and accepted practice they've done for 500 years, it can't be stupid. I think I get this from Chesterton. He says you have to understand it. You can laugh at it, but you have to understand it before you think you can change it. Well, they had all sorts of vetoes in the Roman Constitution, but they also had kind of a 50-50 veto. If the sheep guts didn't turn out the right way, you couldn't go to war.
Pumping the brakes sounds good.
I
to me.
love
And
that.
If it's sheep guts that pumps the brake, that's cool.
Think of how many stupid things that would prevent you from doing as a nation.
By the way, not going to war, you're not pregnant with that. You can always still go to war. Not always. Sometimes you get destroyed. But you can almost always, readdress that tomorrow. But if you go,
Right.
You're in it. Todd, I talk about Todd a lot on this show, our homesteading friend at Group 66 at Online Great Books. I posted in the homesteading channel that I killed most of my tomato starts. And I did.
I saw that.
And Todd says, hey, I said, well, today I'm going to do an autopsy. I want to take a toothpick or my pocket knife and go pick some of the seeds out and see what I did. And he says, where did it go? He says, if you wait until Friday, the moon will enter Sagittarius, which is an auspicious time for fruit-producing plants. So say the biodynamic wizards. You know, my mom would look up in the almanac when was the best time to wean a baby or to potty train them or to plant the garden. You know, Todd talks about these things too. And I've talked to him about it. You know, he's skeptical, but he's like, why not wait till Friday?
Mm-hmm.
Why not? Like, I don't have a reason to do it today. And if the biodynamic wizards or the Farmer's Almanac astrologers say that Friday is a good day, then do it on Friday. Like, you don't know.
When they came to dig my well, we dug a well where I thought it should be. Did get water.
Yeah.
Spent a day doing that. What was his name? I forget his name. Was it Raul?
Yes.
He got out the dowsing rods and picked out a spot, and we got water.
Yep. I know.
It's not scientific. I want to talk more about Dewey's literary sins here. Bottom of 266. I think there's some straw manning here. The idea that an adequate education of any kind can be obtained by means of a miscellaneous assortment of 100 books more or less is laughable when viewed practically. Who says that this is the sum total of your education, to get the great books collection and just read that?
Well, yeah, I don't think anybody does.
So that's a cheap shot. That nobody's actually saying that. You read the great books. If you got that original set and read through them, I think it would do really good things for you. But it's not going to teach you how to run your business. Not explicitly. You're still going to have to learn how to do stuff. But, you know, that's this distinction between the liberal and the mechanical arts or the servile arts. Making that distinction does not commit you to slavery. Servile mechanical arts are not bad things. They're what you have to do. But if you don't know, I'm going to go back to Aristotle, if you don't know your four causes, material, efficient, formal, and final. Material is what it's made of. Efficient is what thing made it, you know, like actually what put the billiard ball in motion. Formal cause is what's the essence of the thing. Final cause is what is it for. If you're able to deal with formal and final, you can figure out material and efficient. That's not very complicated. Once you get the big picture, you can get the little picture. If you're going to go into knife making and you know the formal and final, it's to cut and it's got to be sharp.
Yeah, get out of cardboard.
You're going to make it out of the right thing. You know, so studying the liberal arts will help you figure. Is that dowsing? Yeah. I'm being shown a picture.
My buddy read dowsing and finding the 6-inch water line.
Yeah, that's so weird.
And before we dug, it works.
I've seen it done for 40 years. It's weird.
Penn Jillette doesn't believe it though. So, you know, there you go. It's the end of it. It's the final word.
Well, he believes a lot of stupid things though. He probably believes in liberal democracy.
Yeah, he does. He's lost his daughter too. It's awesome. Karl, a little farther down in that bottom that paragraph, he says, when you look at these books as this way to, you know, he makes a straw man about what the great books movement's about. But then he says, it marks a departure from what is sound in the Greek view of knowledge as a product of intelligence exercised at first hand. It marks reversion to the medieval view of dependence upon the final authority of what others have found out or supposed they had found out, and without the historical grounds that gave reason to the scholars of the Middle Ages. I don't think that's an accurate depiction of scholasticism either. He's attacking the schoolmen.
Nope.
You know, nobody shows their work more than Euclid or Thomas. If you take it on authority from Thomas, the reason you would do that, well, the best reason for you to have done that would be that you have read him showing all of his work and you agree with it. It is not slavish.
Yeah, so I've read a few of the Scholastics, mostly Thomas Aquinas and some John Duns Scotus, and Scotus is worse with making distinctions. If you read the Summa, the two big Summas, if you read the big Summa, the Summa Theologiae, you might get 3, maybe 5 objections before you get to what Thomas thinks, and then he responds to the objections, and they're never stupid objections. If you read his disputed questions, you might get 10 objections. If you read John Duns Scotus, you get 35. And they're, like I say, they're not stupid. They're not straw men.
No.
The best possible reasons for not thinking what the author thinks. Yeah, this is a mischaracterization. Boy, if you study those high medievals, you will be super smart. You might not agree with them. It's okay. Well, maybe it's not okay, but you might not agree with them. You're going to be much, much smarter about the topic you're reading about.
You know, when you read a guy who posts 35 objections to his point and then refutes them all, the chances of you having the 36 irrefutable one are not very good. And if you
actually,
right. And if you do actually have that 36th irrefutable point, you get to go in the canon. You make the cut. You're that guy. You're the once in 300 years guy. Now, let's go on here. This reactionary movement is dangerous, or would be if it made serious headway. Little shiv there in the ribs. Such a prick. Such a prick.
Thanks, John.
Because it ignores and, in effect, denies the principle of experimental inquiry and first-hand observation that is the lifeblood of the entire advance made in the sciences.
Keep going.
An advance so marvelous that the progress in knowledge made in uncounted previous millenniums is almost nothing in comparison.
Shots fired.
It's so ridiculous. So he says this principle of experimental inquiry and first-hand observation. And I wrote next to it, Socrates ? He was not into experiment, though he talks about that a little bit. But first-hand observation, I mean, he's the master of first-hand observation.
Yeah, on the other hand, I think he is into experiment. I think that's what the Socratic method is. It's about, however, justice and piety and the soul and things which are not, I'm sorry, John Dewey, they are not subject to scientific investigation. You can't do an experiment to figure out what is the best life.
No.
You can't do it. You might be able to talk to people about it. So for me, this is an equivocation. He says progress in knowledge. Okay, what is knowledge? Does this include wisdom? Is there progress in wisdom?
No.
You know, those Greeks never dropped atomic bombs on cities. Those barbarians. But, you know, his people did.
Yeah, I don't know, man.
But that's not the cheapest shot of all. There is a cheaper shot, an even worse thing that he does.
Yeah. Hutchins, he quotes from Hutchins. We'll get to his cheap shot. He quotes from Hutchins saying, "We know that there is a natural moral law, and we can understand what it is because we know that man has a nature, and we can understand it," etc. And then Dewey says, "By his inherent and necessary essence, then, man is the same in all ages, climes, and cultures. Nothing can happen to him or in the physical, biological, and social world of which man is part can make any difference to his nature." He doesn't think there's something immutable and essential about man. I think man has an essence.
Yeah, I mean that's the big question. Dewey, he makes clear in the paragraph at the end of 267 and into 268, he thinks that's wrong. He thinks it is the expression of a provincial and conventional point of view of a culture that is pre-scientific in the sense that science bears today. I want to read a little bit more and then I want to deuce on it. Men of at least equal penetration, Aristotle himself, for example, with those now asserting the absolute uniformity of human nature and morals, taught the same thing about natural objects. Okay, so they would teach that things in nature were immutable. And of course now, this I'm not quoting anymore, of course now we know that they're not immutable, and therefore there is no such thing as a human nature. Well, references evolution in the end.
Right, of course he does.
if there is not a human nature, he says, let me, a little bit more, 268, let his own words speak. Belief in the eternal uniformity of human nature is thus the surviving remnant of a belief once universally held about the heavens and about all living creatures. So it's this last little bit, this belief in human nature or the soul or whatever. It's this last remnant of the old way, but we've gotten rid of it. Here's the problem. If there is no such thing as a human, then if you are to make statements such as humans ought not to be murdered, that has no content anymore.
Make something else up. Or if he says humans ought to be educated in this way, what is he doing?
There's a certain sort of thing that is a human. Well, if there's not, oh gosh, off in the political world, there's a person being considered for a job who is unable to define woman.
Or unwilling.
Well, okay, great. Then there's no such thing. I guess women's rights are done because there's no such thing as a woman. If there's no essence, there's nothing you can't do to that thing. The essence is where the moral content comes in. And you don't, dear listener, you don't have to go full medieval, full Thomist with me. Just come a little way with me.
Hey, okay? Listen, don't. Because if you go a little way, you'll do it.
Even Jordan Peterson tweeted out last week something about, is there any other basis for morality than the axiomatic understanding of the value of the human being? And I didn't respond to him because he wouldn't listen to me, but you're getting there, Jordan. Come along. If you don't have that, you have nothing. And everything is grist for the mill. So there are high stakes here. This isn't, we can get rid of medieval, ancient Greek conceptions of human nature and we'll just be fine. We won't be. Which doesn't make it true. The bad things that happen, me saying that morality completely collapses doesn't make my claims about human nature true. But you ought to know what you're doing. And you ought to know that it's Aristotle or Nietzsche. It's not John Dewey.
It's one or the other. Page 269. According to medieval theological philosophy, the basis of all ultimate moral principles is supernatural. Not merely above nature and reason, but so far beyond the scope of the latter that they must be miraculously revealed and sustained. No! You read 3 pages, the first 3 pages of Summa Contra Gentiles, and he refutes this. He tells us that there are 2 ways in which these truths are revealed to us. One is through revelation, which is not available to many. And the other one is through reason. And that his books are devoted to finding these truths through reason. Period. That's it.
Yeah, so there, to be fair to Dewey, there is a supernatural element in Thomas.
There is.
There is a supernatural end for man, but there's also a natural end.
There's a supernatural
which
end.
You could figure out.
And Thomas puts a fence around it. He tells you exactly when he's going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Because he doesn't want you to be confused at all about which arena you're in. He cautions you about this in the very first chapter of the first book of Summa Contra Gentiles. There are several ways to get at this. One of them is revelation, and that's not going to work for most of us. And the other one's reason, and here we go. When he goes to the revelation or he goes to the leap of faith, he tells you when he's doing it.
That's true.
But he sets forth this whole idea of like virtue and proper action, of cosmology, all kinds of stuff, entirely reasonable, not supernatural. Now,
oh, John, I just want to sit him down and ruffle his tie and just say, okay, now you've gone a little bit astray.
I want to put a stick of butter in a tube sock and beat him with it.
Why a stick of butter?
Because it's soft. We don't want to leave a mark on the man. We could put a D cell in a tube sock, but I just want to tune him up. I don't want to kill him. I just want to tune him up, get his attention. Thomas does have us seek a beatific vision. There is a leap there when you accept that beatific vision is a good. But I think his arguments hold short of that even for most people.
Well, if there is such a thing as a human being, and a human being is rational, it seems, I'm just doing Aristotle here, it seems that the good will consist of some exercise of that rationality. It's probably not going to be doing your taxes.
Right.
And so Aristotle says it's contemplation of the first causes. That's entirely a secular argument.
Yeah.
Yeah, all you need to do to get there is to think, yeah, there's a human nature. I want to read a little more.
Yeah, I do.
This is on 270. Another little bit of sleight of hand. The actual state of the case, however, is that there are factors at work in contemporary life that are of transcendent value in promise, if not yet in achievement. They are experimental science and the experimental method in the field of knowledge. This field includes a definite morale and ethic as well, does it, as definite conclusions about man and the world. The second modern factor is the democratic spirit in human relations. The third is technological control of the energies of nature in behalf of human ends. All three are closely linked. So these are the things that are new and different, and he says transcendent value, and I wish to say, John, how do you get transcendent value from finite things? What do you mean by this?
What do you mean?
Socrates would say, I am so happy to have met you, John, because I meet many people in Athens, and many consider themselves wise, and I find out that they are not so. But here you, John Dewey, must be extremely wise. Why, yes, Socrates, I am extremely wise. You could just read my published works. But what I'm most interested in today is you use this word transcendent value. I've waited my whole life to have somebody teach me what is of transcendent value. But I can't get there because first I need to know what you mean by transcendent value. Well, clearly the transcendent values are the things that we educational elites value. And then Socrates might say, are they good because you value them, or do you value them because they're good? And then you've got the whole thing. Socrates lives in my head.
Ought to.
He leaves a mess,
That's
though.
the unwanted house guest. That's the liberal education, right? The BS detector, that walks around with you all the time. What perhaps is not equally obvious is that the marvelous advance in natural science has come about because of the breaking down of the wall existing in ancient and medieval institutions between higher things of purely intellectual and spiritual nature and lower things of a practical and material nature. No. One of the errors the progressives make is conflating this technological progress with their beliefs. Like Francis Bacon laid out in the New Organon, this way of doing induction, boom, 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 antibiotics, and progress. But people have been technologically iterating since jump. They try to tear a tree down with their hands so they can, have a fire, maybe. And then they get a rock and they beat a branch off of it. Then they get a sharper rock. Like, we've been doing iteration forever. Maybe these sort of advances that we see are natural and emergent and have nothing to do with this guy's philosophy.
I have a Dover book. I think I might have packed it, but it's I think I did. The History of Mechanics. As a science, not auto mechanics.
A guy named Steve in Indiana overhauling Buicks.
In the beginning was Steve. Reading through the table of contents, just doing your inspectional reading of the thing, and you find it. You would expect there to be maybe Archimedes, and then Newton. It's not true. There's lots of people, and we know their names, who were doing work to figure out force and motion and coming up with a lot of it. So Newton does not appear like a comet in the dark sky. He's building on a whole lot of other people's work.
You read Aristotle's physics, and you're going to see conservation of motion and Newton's laws in there. They're not phrased in Newton's ways, but they're in there.
I think Aristotle's more right about motion than Newton is, because objects do not continue in motion. They only continue in motion in the abstract case of a vacuum, which never exists.
Right.
So Newton only exists as an abstraction. In the world that you observe, Aristotle is more correct.
Yep.
Take that, moderns.
We have not as yet a philosophy that is modern in other than a chronological sense. We do not have as yet an educational or any other social institution that is not a mixture of opposed elements. He wants a new philosophy. We've got automobiles and electric light bulbs and batteries and disposable razors, so we need a new philosophy, see?
Well, again, what is philosophy? Love of wisdom, right? What is wisdom, Mr. Dewey?
Well, what's truth?
Professor Dewey.
What's truth? Like, if you have an old philosophy and now we have streptomycin, we need a new one. Like, what can be true about philosophy if non-philosophical exigencies change it? What is that? What can you even say? What kind of claims can we make?
I'm clenching my fist. I'm kind of mad at him. Like that third thing that he said, the third is technological control of the energies of nature in behalf of humane ends. Humane, he sneaks that thing in again. Humane, well, what is a human? Should we use these energies? Maybe. Maybe not. We would use them better if we did them in a humane way. I agree with you. But what is a human?
We're going to be butchering chickens here in a pretty short while. And people talk about humane butchering practices. I'm like, wait a minute. I'm not dressing out a guy. It's a chicken. You know, why do we call that humane? You know, that's interesting.
It is interesting, and I think the point of it is okay. The point of the humane butchering of livestock isn't so much for the livestock as it is for you. Okay? It doesn't make a huge difference to the chicken if it goes from living chicken to dead chicken in 1 second or 10.
Yeah.
However, it makes a difference to you if you're the sort of person who leaves a chicken unnecessarily having a slow death.
I'm shooting for 1 second. But again, you know, that's the humane thing. Like, what's the poultry thing? I don't know.
What's the poultry thing? What's the nature of the chicken?
Feathered dinosaur.
Yes. What is an ordinary chicken death in the wild?
Yeah, coyote eats you.
Are there even chickens in the wild anymore?
Well, there never was here in North America. You know, there's this lady, Temple Grandin. Have you heard of this lady, Carl?
Not just by name.
She is an autistic lady. She is a consultant on animal handling. Having autism means that she can be dispassionate in ways that others can't, maybe, in sometimes.
The medievals would have called her phlegmatic, I believe.
Phlegmatic, maybe. She has written about, cattle handling facilities that cater to the cowness of the cow, right? You know, the cow has 130 degree range of vision.
Yeah, you've talked about her before.
The cow is X tall, and she says, you know, this is how you build a cattle handling facility to make that sorting and handling of cattle as calm and as stress-free as possible. She talks about, you know, using the cone to restrain the chicken. You know, that really, people have used that in the past, but she has figured out why that is the best way to dispatch chickens for meat. And I would say this is no slam on her, that the fact that she is autistic and has a deficiency perhaps in emotional response makes her better suited for making these decisions than some other non-autistic people would. Now, is the autism a deficiency? Or, man being the rational animal, having that, well, is it a virtuous deficiency? It renders her more human than the emotional, quote-unquote, normal person would be. So what's humane? I'm getting at what's humane. What does that mean?
Even to know that her condition is a deficiency requires you to know what a human ought to be. Do we just add up the average of humans?
Maybe she's what they ought to be, but I know what they are, which is emotional, reactionary, et cetera, et cetera.
This is the sort of question that leads theologians into opining about the fall of man. You know, can you just take the average state of a human being as we are and just run a spreadsheet and say, this is the ideal human? I don't think so. I don't think we believe that. I think that there is a moral cause that you can recognize. This is why stories of heroism resonate with you. Because the current state that you're in isn't the state that you think you should be in. And for most people, well, for a lot of people, that's the case. You know, that's kind of, I think, the reason for resentment is the genuine aristoi, the genuine great people, show you what you could be but are not. And they throw it back on you. Why are you not like them? And it makes you face your own failings.
Yeah.
And easier than facing your own failings is resentment and talking about how they're somehow the evil ones.
How dare you?
It's always Nietzsche. Nietzsche and Socrates live in my head.
How dare you?
They get along surprisingly well. You wouldn't think they would.
Are we compelled, Karl, at the bottom of 271, to hold that one method obtains in natural science and another radically different in moral questions? Yes.
Yes, we are. That's what I wrote in my notes. Absolutely, we are. And this is my favorite bit of Hume, pointing out that ought distinction, which is for the most part true. There's a way in which it isn't true, because if you understand what a human being is in the fullest sense, you can eventually figure out some oughts. But that you have to have a really thick notion of the human being to get there. But certainly natural sciences do not tell you what you should do. They just don't.
Yeah, it's just data.
Yeah, discovery of penicillin does not tell you that you should treat illnesses with it. There's a joke, a terrible movie, the live-action Grinch movie, where the Grinch, Jim Carrey, is saying his agenda for the day, and one of the items on his agenda is cure cancer, tell no one. You don't have to do anything about it.
Right.
The discovery itself makes no moral demands on you. You bring moral demands into the discovery, and then you say, wow, this is really good. I better do something with it.
We were talking in the Telegram chat that you guys are missing out on about a utopian society I was going to create.
He does this about every month, by the way.
I've been working on it. And I said that in this utopian society, we were going to ban certain vices. And then people say, oh, well, the war on drugs hasn't worked. I'm like, well, they didn't really go to war. I mean, they're just assing around, you know. If you put a bounty on drug dealers, like you do coyotes, some of this stuff might get a little better. I mean, how many dads would go find that guy that sold their kid that shit if it was legal?
Mm-hmm.
I'm raising my hand. And I said alcoholism and drug abuse were going to be illegal. And then so I said, but abuse. Well, how do we know what's abuse? And I said, well, we have, and I think Chesterton talks about we have ways of dealing with alcohol for convivial purposes, for celebratory purposes, so on. We know how to do it. We've had it a long, long time, and we know how to do alcohol properly. And we know what disordered or intemperate alcohol use is. Go ahead.
Chesterton's rule, you still have to be able to write poetry about the glories of wine. Then you can have another one. Go.
But we really don't know. We don't know how to do that with drugs.
I'm trying to figure out what rhymes with Merlot.
I don't know. I'm no poet.
I guess
we'll
can't
have to ask Kleinfelter. But we don't really have that for drugs. People will say, oh, well, these Native Americans knew what to do with peyote or maybe psilocybin mushrooms or whatever. And I say, oh, but we've lost that. They don't have those usages and customs around those things anymore. So though temperate drug use might be possible, since we don't know how to do it, then we can't. We can't even try. We're not going to tempt the dragon. We're not going to mess with it because we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So, with these discoveries that we're talking about, you're talking about cure cancer. Okay, well, I think that if we found a cancer cure, it's probably, I'm not 100% sure it would be best if we used it, but probably. No, I'm serious. How long do we need to live?
Well, it depends on what's involved with the cure, and
there's a whole. It's not a slam dunk. If they kill the tumor, but now you're a vegetable, or they kill the tumor and now you're completely altered and your Karlness is gone. There are all kinds of reasons why you might not actually want to cure a cancer with a particular method.
Did you ever watch Babylon 5?
Who are you talking to?
Complete nerd show. I loved it. I watched it through twice. There's an episode where there's this alien scientist, of course, and she has discovered, I forget exactly what, I think it might be a way for immortality, a way to cure some terrible disease. The only problem is it requires, the killing of a bunch of other people to make it happen.
Adrenochrome?
Embryonic stem cell research. Maybe there's some things you shouldn't ought to try.
Yeah. So back to old Stinky here. If science and technology, uncover these things that he calls new knowledge, I would say that in most cases we should prohibit use of those things until we have an understanding of what they are and what the knock-on effects are and so on. And if that means that, the cure for cancer is there in front of us, but we don't use it, I think the benefits of that kind of caution far, far, far outweigh the loss that you would have from, adopting that supposed beneficial thing.
But in order to figure out whether or not to adopt it, you need to have this sort of other method. So as he says, are we compelled to hold that one method obtains in natural science and another radically different in moral questions? All right, so you're Oppenheimer. You're up there in New Mexico. You're working on the atomic bomb. And somebody says to you, should we use this thing that you're building? Can Oppenheimer look in his physics book or through whatever tools they used and find there the answer as to whether it should be used? His method is scientific. Does the scientific method tell him whether to drop the thing or not?
No. And he struggled with that, I think, until they threw dirt on him.
Yeah.
Yeah. The very foundation of democratic procedure, Karl, is dependence upon experimental production of social change. What the fuck is that?
Wait. Where is this?
The last paragraph on 273. The very foundation of democratic procedure is dependence upon experimental production of social change and experimentation directed by working principles that are tested and developed in the very process of being tried out in action. What? Hey, experiment with yourself, pal.
Well, okay. So you have a proposed course of action and you take it to the assembly and the assembly votes on it and we see how it goes and then we assemble again to vote on the voting and see how it goes the next time. Okay, fair enough. But experimental inquiry and test, the scientific method. How do you know if the choices you've made are good or not? That requires an understanding of the good, which he doesn't seem to give, except in that last paragraph I read. What is it that he said? Cheap material goods and
freeing the
growth and
freeing the
uncovering of your capacities. Yeah, so if you can let your freak flag fly and have cheap flags.
Well, that may be a little bit off, but maybe exposing your educational capacities would be a good.
It probably is, but it's a subordinate good. Or if it's not a subordinate good, you have to tell me why. And that's going to take a lot of work.
All right. Maybe we should talk about his prescriptions. You know, he, rather than deal with these old ideas, he talks about, let's see, where can I find it? Here, I think it's in 264. And he's right about this. The problem of going ahead instead of going back is then a problem of liberalizing our technical and vocational education. The average worker has little or no awareness of the scientific processes embodied in the work he carries on. What he does is often to him routine and mechanical. To this extent, the diagnosis the critics make of present vocational education is correct in too many cases. But the reactionary remedy involved fixation of just that which is bad in the present system. Instead of seeking an education that would make all who go to school aware of the scientific basis of industrial processes, they would draw the line still more sharply between those who receive a vocational training, deliberately kept illiberal, and the much smaller number who enjoy a liberal education, after the Greek literary model. I think he's full of beans there, but the great books thing is about everybody getting it. He's wrong about that. But
right. Yeah, Hutchins wants everybody to read these things. He's more optimistic on that than I am.
Yeah. But I think Dewey's right about how useful and helpful it would be if people understood the scientific underpinnings of what it is they do, instead of taking a monkey see, monkey do approach or a sort of flowchart approach to diagnosing whatever. My tractor wouldn't start the other day, Karl.
Mm-hmm. I heard.
I had been using it. I killed it and got off of it and did some stuff. I got back on it, and it wouldn't even go click. It was clearly an electrical. Well, it wasn't clearly an electrical problem, actually. Probably an electrical problem. And after working on it for a while, I found it had 3 separate electrical issues. One, the ground battery cable in the crimp-on eyelet on the side of on the end of the cable that bolts to the block to create the ground, that had failed. So I had an intermittent bad ground.
Mm-hmm.
If you have an intermittent bad ground, from time to time, the voltage that the starter motor or electrical items would see, quote unquote, see, drops. Now, the starter motor is wound and made to pull a certain wattage. And when that starter motor is engaged, by God, it's going to pull that wattage. And if the voltage it's receiving is too low, it will pull more amps. Because that's how it works. So this thing was receiving a low voltage and calling an enormous amperage. So not only was that cable bad, that ground bad, it then caused a relay to go bad because it was operating out of spec, pulling there were too many amps going through the big end of the relay. And all of this unnecessary stress, all this huge amperage demand, caused my battery to fail prematurely. So I ended up with 3 things. They were related. Now, I bought the John Deere Technical and Repair Manual for $262. I couldn't even steal it. I tried. And there's a diagnostic tree.
Did you buy it? Hold on. Did you buy this tractor new?
No, I did not. It
would seem to me they would include the manual.
Well, I have an owner's manual, but this is the technical manual.
The technical manual.
Yeah, that's like 1,800 pages.
How expensive is a tractor?
Well, this was probably $28,000 new.
I'm just saying, John Deere, you could spend a little money and give people the technical manual.
Oh, John Deere doesn't even want you to work on them. They're the ones that, want to lease the operating system on the tractor to you and but this one predates all that. But in the technical manual, there's a section before there's there's a blurb. It's not really a blurb. There's an exposition before every system is described, where they call it the theory of operation. So when you go to the thing on the starting system, it tells you the theory of operation. It says this tractor operates on 12 volts DC. The flow is from this terminal to that terminal. When to start the tractor, the key switch, it's not an ignition switch because it's not gasoline, it's diesel. The key switch is turned to the right, turned clockwise. This voltage there goes from there to the relay. The relay opens, blah, blah, blah. It tells you exactly everything that happens. And then, after you read about the theory of operation, there's a diagnostic procedure. What is the voltage across the terminals on the battery? Okay, there's that. Okay, now go to the right side of the fusible link. What is the voltage there? It should match the battery voltage, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
There was zero discussion about circuits, how they work, the wattage of the starter motor, how it would demand higher amperage if the voltage was low. None of that. Now, in the diagnostic tree, it would tell you, okay, put your the positive lead on your volt ohm meter here on the fusible link and the other one on the ground. The voltage that you see there should be the battery voltage. My battery was throwing 12.87 volts. It should be 14.2. They don't say that. They didn't say that. So I would see 12.87 volts everywhere. That's too low. But according to the diagnostic tree, everything was right.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I wanted to hang myself.
But if you'd had a Dewey education,
I would have been better equipped for it. And actually, I do. I took physics. I know this stuff. I knew it. And I was able to figure it out. And I called Uncle Roy. He's going to be in your history of mechanics, diesel mechanic. And and he said, "Hey, listen, that starter motor is probably asking for 500 amps at 12 volts. What's going to happen if it's not getting the 12 volts?" I was like, "What's going to pull more amps?" He's like, "All right, go forth." He didn't tell me the answer, but he's like, "Okay, go forth." And then I figured it out, Dewey's not wrong about that.
Well, the thought that I had, the word that popped in my head was craftsman, as opposed to, pushing a button on the line. That would be better.
Yeah. Artisan.
Yeah. The diesel mechanic of note still needs to know what to do with his life.
Yeah.
And he still needs to have, why even go to work? You need liberal education, or you need access to the fruits of a liberal education.
I think that we are the rational animals. And if we have this scientific underpinning for our technical work, like Dewey's calling for, I think we're able to be rational. Instead of having a monkey see, monkey do approach to diagnosing the electrical problem in the tractor, having the underpinning would allow me to think it through, discover it for myself, and would make the whole activity more rewarding. Karl, there were 3 of those problems. I would fix one of the problems and it still wouldn't start. Like, you understand how, it's crazy, but yeah.
Yes. No, I have done similar things, but not with diesel engines, usually with computers. Very frustrating. All right. I want to talk about the worst thing that Dewey does. It's on the top of 274. And, having him do this, Okay, so he's 85. Maybe he's crabby. Maybe he's like, who's that guy, that linguist, that
Chomsky.
Maybe he's like Chomsky, and he's just old and crabby. It is no mere accident that continental Europe, which is now the most disturbed portion of the world and the source of tragic disturbance everywhere else, is just that part that has struck most closely to the educational philosophy we are now being urged to go back to. What has he just said?
He is laying World War II at the foot of liberal arts education.
Hutchins, you Nazi.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a dirty trick. It's not true, of course. I do not believe that Germany had liberal education.
Oh.
We read that letter from, what's his name? I forget the guy's name. Starts with an F.
Oh, my gosh. Say more.
You're blanking on it, too. We read it. It was after the Prussian defeat. It was a letter to the Prussian people on education.
Oh, Fichte.
Yeah, we read that. The German people are the founders of the compulsory education of the youth.
In 1944, Germany, progressive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, if you want to learn more about that, at least my source on that, on pre-war Germany is an interesting thing to look at. And you can read Hayek's book, The Road to Serfdom.
Yeah.
Which is worth a read. And find out all of the ways in which they were, in fact, socialist. He was there. He was in Austria, you know. Yeah, that's a dirty trick. That Nazi thing. It's 1944. He's early on the Nazi train on calling his enemies Nazis, but that makes me think very poorly of John Dewey.
Good. The chief opportunity and chief responsibility of those who call themselves philosophers are to make clear the intrinsic kinship of democracy with the methods of directing change that have revolutionized science. What? If I'm a philosopher, my job is to make clear the intrinsic kinship of democracy and science? What else would you want me to do? Like, what if my good philosophy comes up with a different answer? Is it okay, Jim, John, Jack?
No. Must be his view of liberal democracy. If you get any other answer, you're not thinking correctly. Well, that's a very illiberal way of thinking. The liberal way of thinking is, well, is democracy good? Well, what is democracy? What is the good? Let's go from there. Maybe it is.
If it were good, how would we know?
Yeah.
So, time and again, we read people like this, and I see stuff like this in them. I like Hume's is odd, but Hume on causality is just not very good. I see this. This is just not very good. And I wonder, how did these people get the traction they got? Like, this is just not good. How does this happen that we're talking about Dewey? And I didn't know that Dewey wasn't good until I read him. But, why does he keep coming up? Why do our intellectual overlords keep telling us that we need to read Dewey? Because it's just ahistorical. It's shoddy. I don't get it, man.
There's this ancient story I heard from people in the East about a garden and a tree. It's a mystery which also undermines his project. The perversity of human nature, the spitefulness of the human, it might be the basis of his project. An urge to domination.
Okay, now he might have the will to power, an urge for domination. Does everybody that recommends him have that, share in that urge? Is that why he keeps coming back?
I don't know. It's useful. It's most people are not deep thinkers.
How deep of a thinker do you have to be when he says this? the job of philosophy is to prove my point.
No, but you have to be a pretty deep thinker, because if you grew up in America, you are miseducated, in my opinion, but you are told that United States is a democracy. It's not. But you're told that it is, and you're told that democracy is a great thing, and that diversity is our strength, and all of that stuff. Okay, so that's what you are told is your melting pot, all that, the stuff we were taught. And then you read this sentence, and it fits perfectly well with everything you've been taught. And you say, oh yeah, yeah, it's the intrinsic kinship of democracy with science. Yes, very good. That sounds right to me. That smells right. In order to get beyond the smell and see that he's actually saying nonsense, requires something from you. It requires a bit more. It requires a sort of thinking that, dare I say, John Dewey, you get from a liberal education. That if you read that 5-foot shelf of books and really read it, you would be able to see through your crap. It doesn't mean you'd have all the answers. It's not sufficient. What we do in Online Grade Books, it's not sufficient. It's an awfully good start. It makes you able to see these things more easily. As to what your final decision, dear listener, what you think is ultimately the truth, it's up to you.
Check in with me first, but
you can disagree with Scott if you want to be wrong, but do your best. Figure out what you think is true, good, and beautiful. And perhaps you have a different viewpoint than I do, but at least you'll know why you think it. And you will be less susceptible to nice-sounding platitudes.
The most immediate human problem of our age, Karl, is to effect a transformation of the immense resources the new technology has put in our hands into positive instruments of human being. How would he know what that was?
I asked what makes them positive.
The contribution that the reactionary philosophy makes is to urge that technology and science are intrinsically of an inferior and illiberal nature. No, that's not true.
You confuse the method with the end.
Yeah.
There's nothing. Science is a method to serve an end. It's not the end itself. At least as he's talking about it.
The problem is a concrete one. How shall this and that definite factory and field operation be made to contribute to the educative release and growth of human capacity, as well as the production of large and reasonably cheap supply of material goods?
Gotta have cheap material goods.
He's not wrong when he says, how shall this or that factory or field operation be made to contribute to the educative release and growth of human capacities? Maybe I'm on board with releasing and growing human capacities. Maybe. I'm not, but let me just grant it.
Some human capacities ought not be released.
Right. I don't just disagree with everything. He points out some problems. But goodness gracious. So pompous.
Yeah. Do we need to do any more of him?
I don't know. I had some stuff I was saving for hour 5.
Yeah, but very influential in the construction of public school education in the United States and even private school education.
Private schools are almost entirely modern progressive educational organs.
Yeah, it's hard not to. I mean, it's in the air.
Yeah.
It's the air you're breathing.
The game, and this is a consequence, one of the consequences of his ideas that he didn't foresee. I hope he didn't, because if he did, then he's more evil than I thought, is that the educational game has become just that. It's really not about education. It's about checking boxes, going through a procedure in a particular kind of windmilling to get anointed and credentialed, right? So you go to school, you go to K through 12 and maybe pre-K through 12 in order to go to the right university, in order so that you can get the right whatever, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And private schools are actually better at that than most of the public schools. most private schools are better at getting you into the next stage than most public schools. I think that's the wrong aim. And if that's the case, then you might be worse off at the private school than at the public school. Does that jive, Karl?
Mm-hmm.
I was warehoused at a minimum security facility for underage people in Rogers County. Sometimes I'm resentful about that, but that warehousing, I didn't take a lot of damage from the warehousing. If I had gone to a good school, I'm pretty sure I would have taken more damage.
Mm-hmm. When I was in college, there was a guy there. He was a senior, and he was having a rough time, and he quit. He quit like a month into the second semester. So 3 months short of getting the paper. And I thought, what in the hell is he doing? Why is he doing that? It was inconceivable to me that he could do this. And, you know, one of his lady girlfriends said, he needs to do this. He needs to. So I guess he did. But, you know, now I understand that a lot more. You know, I know you did something like that. I know our producer did something like that. You read Walden. That's the thing about liberal education. It is a bomb. It might ruin your life in the best way. You might actually say, this is all crap. Why am I doing this? And then go do something else, which won't help us get a cheap supply of material goods.
Oh, no.
Yeah, that guy, that Henry David Thoreau, he's out there planting beans in a shack. How is he contributing to the GDP?
Oh, no. All right. Well, there's that. This essay is mostly a refutation of the great book, the men of the great books movement of the kind of mid-century, 20th century. And Dewey, as a result, Dewey is not putting forth his philosophy, well, almost full stop. That's not the purpose of this essay. So it's not really fair. Maybe it's not a full treatment of his philosophy of progressive education, but you can see it. You can see it through the cracks here. I think he's not wrong about providing, you know, more scientific background to technicians, more theoretical training for people in the servile arts. He's not wrong about that. You know, if somebody is going to learn how to do canning, they ought to know something about PV equals nRT, and they ought to know something about bacteria and all kinds of interesting things, instead of just having a monkey see, monkey do approach where they push the button and yank the lever and get the food pellet. Mm-hmm. But behind all of that is his belief that people are changeable, that the educator has a role in how they will change, and that the educator, or at least the educator at his level, who educates the educators, gets to steer history.
Yeah.
Were that it so. You know? Were that it was so. But whatever. Silmarillion. Ugh.
You better hit it. Do your best.
Look,
if we have to delay, we can delay.
I'm doing better.
I had a temptation the other day. I have to confess it.
Okay.
It was St. Patrick's Day. The old sod was calling to me, and I was tempted to read James Joyce. Yeah,
I saw you posted a little bit of that.
He's so good, but then at the end I think, why did he do this? That Ulysses is... It's definitely a work of genius. Why'd he do it?
I have never read it. I tried a couple times and thought, yeah, I can throw it over my shoulder.
Yeah, I did it with Audible. It was easier to have a good narrator read, because it's otherwise you get caught trying to figure out what all the references are.
Yeah,
just forget it. Just let it flow. I might take another run at it. Maybe in the heat of summer.
Yeah. I'm not going to live long enough. No, really. I mean, what am I supposed to do? I can't read it.
Yeah,
all,
I know.
You know? Dadgummit.
No, I'll cycle out some of my Space Marines.
Yeah.
And replace it.
Instead of Space Marines, I'm reading Gardening When It Counts.
Very good.
Yeah, that's a pretty good one. And then, of course, I'm working on Summa Contra Gentiles, which is awesome. And I want to read Aquinas' commentary on Aristotle's metaphysics.
Mm-hmm. I think I have a paper copy of that somewhere.
I've got one, and it's, my goodness, it's an anvil of a book, and I know it'll be good. I know it'll be good for me.
He tells you exactly why Aristotle puts every sentence where he puts it.
Yeah. Not lecture notes. Guys, Aristotle, Pasquarello was making this point the other day in Slack. Aristotle's not lecture notes. Just because it's not flowery and doesn't appeal to your aesthetic sense doesn't mean it was lecture notes. Aristotle's metaphysics is a technical manual.
Yeah, it might be. All right, so come join us. Go to onlinegreatbooks.com/podcast.
Yeah, that's it.
And sign up if you'd like to join us. Get your own group of people to read these books with.
Yeah, defend yourself against the progressive educators. Undo some of the damage that you took, maybe.
See the wires on Pinocchio.
Pick some of the scabs off. It's good times.
It is, actually.
Yeah, it mostly is. We'll cover the Silmarillion for the next trip. It'll be good. Yeah, I think we've got a plan. So Silmarillion, and then what?
Gibbon's going to take a little work. I probably need to buy it, but I might want to buy it after I've settled.
Right. All right. Well, we'll figure it out. We gave out a number of good ones. Some Laura Ingalls Wilder, Gibbon, Albert J. Nock, and then there was one other.
Asimov.
Yeah. Yeah. All those.
That'll take you an hour to read.
All those will be good.
Be easy.
Yeah, I've read those a long time ago, so that'll be good. Wouldn't be bad to read Moon is a Harsh Mistress. Yeah, there's plenty to do. We'll get it done.